the second act, still in it, is TV Unity!
In a world where television dreams often glitter with promises of overnight stardom, Roland Abante's story shatters the illusion with a haunting resonance that lingers far beyond the final applause. Once hailed as the golden voice from the Philippines on the prestigious stage of America's Got Talent, Roland's emotional rendition of When a Man Loves a Woman captured millions around the globe and earned him roaring standing ovations from all four judges. Yet behind the teary-eyed praise and viral headlines lay a carefully crafted media narrative that some say exploited his poverty-stricken background more than it celebrated his artistry. Introduced to the world as a humble fisherman juggling motorcycle driving gigs and karaoke dreams in the coastal town of Santander, Cebu, Roland was quickly elevated into the status of a feel-good fairy tale, only to be quietly discarded when the spotlight dimmed. No record deals followed, no mainstream contracts materialized, no golden buzzer redemption arc was offered. The very image of a man who moved mountains just to fly to the US for a chance at a new life became a fleeting headline in entertainment blogs. The same media that adored his sincerity would soon forget his name, returning their focus to newer faces and flashier spectacles. For Roland, the aftermath of that international moment was not a red carpet, but rather a silent, uncelebrated return to reality. A fisherman once again facing the waves of everyday struggle. And as fans began questioning why a voice so powerfully praised was left to fade into obscurity, a deeper, more unsettling question emerged. Was Roland Abante a celebrated artist? Or merely a pawn in a ratings game dressed as inspiration? What unfolded next would uncover a truth that most talent shows never air, one of sacrifice, pressure, heartbreak, and quiet resilience. This is not just a story of a missed opportunity. It is the heartbreaking tragedy of a man who gave everything to a dream, only to discover that fame is not a finish line, but a fleeting flame. Long before the global applause and glittering stage lights, Roland Abante's journey began in the quiet coastal town of Santander, Cebu, where the waves crashing on the shore echoed the daily struggles of survival rather than the melody of dreams. Born in 1978 into a large family teetering on the edge of poverty, Roland grew up without the luxury of stable education or career prospects. While many boys his age worried about schoolwork, Roland was already braving the open sea before sunrise, fishing for hours alongside other local men, facing unpredictable weather, rough tides, and the cruel uncertainty of whether the day's catch would be enough to feed the family. His hands calloused by labor, he also drove a habal-habal motorcycle in the afternoons to ferry passengers and goods across narrow rural paths, just to make ends meet. Yet amidst the grit and grind of daily toil, there was always music. His parents, though poor, filled their home with melodies sung during chores, and young Roland listened closely, mimicking every note with a fascination that bordered on obsession. In the dim glow of karaoke machines scattered across his village, Roland found his sanctuary, belting out soul ballads with a voice soaked in emotion, shaped not by formal training but by the rawness of life itself. He would sing to radio hits by April Boy Regino and Ariel Rivera, emulating the emotional weight of their lyrics, while slowly forming his own signature style, husky, heartfelt, and deeply resonant. The cramped karaoke rooms became his classroom, the vinyl speakers his teachers, and the quiet applause of neighbors his only validation. There were no vocal coaches or music mentors, only grit, repetition, and a deep-seated belief that perhaps someday, this voice could carry him beyond the shores of Cebu. But in that moment, his world was small, his options limited, and music was nothing more than a nightly escape, one that gave hope in a life dominated by financial strain, communal duty, and a future that felt perpetually out of reach. The turning point in Roland Abante's life came not with a grand audition or label signing, but with a humble, grainy video uploaded to social media in an unfiltered clip of a karaoke session where he performed To Love Somebody with such raw emotion that it instantly struck a nerve with Filipinos around the world. The video, circulated by fans and strangers alike, catapulted Roland from local obscurity into the digital limelight, earning him the nickname, the Michael Bolton of the Philippines. With a husky voice that could soar across octaves and carry pain as if each lyric were a page from his own life, Roland began to build a following, not from marketing dollars or television airtime, but from shares, likes, and emotional comments. People didn't just hear his voice, they felt it. Inspired by the traction, Roland released his debut EP titled Buno in 2017, a name drawn from the Cebuano word symbolizing both coconut husk and the action of pulling in a fishing net, a fitting metaphor for a man rooted in the seas, now reeling in fragments of a bigger dream. The EP didn't skyrocket him into mainstream fame, but it cemented his image as a real artist, not a novelty act or gimmick, but someone who had something to say and the soul to sing it. At the same time, he created a fan page called Roland Abante Buno, which began attracting a steady community of supporters who didn't just admire his voice, but respected his perseverance. Still, with no label backing, no media machinery to propel him forward, and limited resources, Roland remained a man torn between two worlds: the fisherman who still braved the ocean for income, and the rising star who now performed in small-town events, weddings, and digital live streams. Yet even with one foot in poverty and the other cautiously stepping toward potential stardom, Roland never let go of the mic. The karaoke nights continued, but now they were peppered with hope, and every note he sang carried the silent question: how far can one voice, born from hardship and heartache, really go? By 2017, Roland Abante's name had begun to echo beyond the narrow alleys of Santander and into the national consciousness of the Philippines, thanks in part to his viral karaoke fame and growing online support. But it wasn't until he stepped onto the televised stage of Tawag ng Tanghalan, a prestigious singing competition aired on ABS-CBN, that he had his first real taste of national exposure. Armed with little more than his signature voice and a battered heart seasoned by hardship, Roland chose to perform Some Hearts Are Diamonds, a ballad that demanded both vocal control and emotional depth. He won the day's round, a small but symbolic victory, proving that his talent wasn't just internet hype. It had real power, even in front of critical judges and millions of live viewers. Yet his triumph was short-lived. He failed to advance further in the competition, a setback that struck deeply, not just for the missed opportunity, but for the emotional investment it cost him to try in the first place. Still, rather than sinking into regret, Roland processed the experience like he did every hardship, quietly, humbly, and with unshaken resolve. He returned home without the grand prize, but with something more valuable: the understanding that he belonged on big stages. It was the first time a national audience saw his pain, his vulnerability, and his power all in one performance. He didn't walk away with a trophy, but he carried home a newfound confidence and an even stronger desire to keep singing. Rather than chasing cameras, he went back to his roots: karaoke sessions, small-town gigs, and live streams, where loyal fans flooded the comments with hearts and fire emojis. He didn't need a title to feel validated. That one televised round showed Roland and the country that the Michael Bolton of the Philippines wasn't a passing internet trend. He was a force waiting to be discovered, again and again by those who truly listened. For most aspiring singers, getting on America's Got Talent feels like winning the lottery. But for Roland Abante, the road to that coveted stage was paved not with industry connections or label endorsements, but with donations, borrowed hope, and a community that believed in the voice of a fisherman. When the invitation to AGT finally came, it was both a blessing and a logistical nightmare. Roland had never owned a passport, never flown on a plane, and had never even traveled far beyond his own region in Cebu. The costs of applying for a US visa, taking medical tests, booking flights, and securing lodging in a foreign land were staggering for someone still juggling motorcycle deliveries and coastal fishing just to survive. But in a show of grassroots love, his fans rallied together, organizing fundraisers, collecting donations, and scraping together every peso needed to lift Roland from the humble streets of Santander to the dazzling lights of Los Angeles. It was a journey of biblical proportions, a man of the sea crossing oceans, not for fish, but for the faint promise of fame. Language presented another formidable obstacle. With no formal training in English, Roland had to rely on an interpreter to help him communicate with producers and judges, adding pressure and vulnerability to an already high-stakes situation. But when he stepped on stage, those insecurities faded behind his sheer presence. He introduced himself through trembling words and translated pauses, but when he sang, "When a Man Loves a Woman," the emotion needed no translator. His voice cut through the room like a blade of truth, shaking both the live audience and viewers around the world. Judges praised his tone, his sincerity, and his courage, and yet behind the applause was an invisible weight. Roland knew he wasn't just singing for a dream. He was carrying the hopes of an entire nation, the trust of every supporter who helped him get there, and the burden of knowing that failure would mean letting them all down. This wasn't just a talent show. For Roland, it was a once-in-a-lifetime mission, a high-wire act of faith with no safety net, where one note too flat or one phrase misunderstood could collapse the entire dream. And still he stood tall, armed only with a microphone and the belief that music, even in broken English, could be understood by the heart. What happened next felt like a cruel twist in a tale that had inspired millions. As Roland Abante returned to the America's Got Talent stage in September 2023 for the semi-finals, brimming with hope, pressure, and the echoes of a previous standing ovation still ringing in his ears. This time, he chose the universally beloved anthem, "I Will Always Love You," made iconic by Whitney Houston, a song that demanded not only flawless vocal technique, but emotional mastery under immense scrutiny. Standing under a single spotlight, Roland poured his heart into every note, his voice trembling with vulnerability, yet unwavering in control. The performance was nothing short of breathtaking. The audience rose to their feet once again, and even the normally restrained Simon Cowell broke his usual composure to call the performance spectacular. Sofia Vergara declared it worthy of a final. Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel chimed in with glowing praise, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed inevitable that Roland would advance to the final round. But reality hit like a slap. Roland was eliminated. No explanations, no justifications, just a painful absence from the results. The headlines in the Philippines the next morning read like collective heartbreak. Fisherman eliminated after 2 standing ovations. Fans were outraged. On social media and in comment sections, debates exploded over how a contestant with such raw talent and emotional power could be cut, while others with flashier presentations and special effects breezed through. Some argued that Roland lacked the visual spectacle that many AGT acts leaned into. No lasers, no backup dancers, no jaw-dropping stunts. Others whispered about potential biases, noting he wasn't an American citizen, and therefore perhaps seen as less commercially viable for the US audience and sponsors. Still, Roland held his head high. In a post-elimination interview, he simply thanked the judges, the audience, and his supporters with no hint of bitterness, just the quiet grace of a man who'd grown used to weathering storms. But beneath that composure, one truth echoed louder than any applause. Sometimes even the most soul-stirring voices are drowned out by a system that values performance over purpose. Roland had conquered hearts, but not the system. And that heartbreaking disconnect between talent and reward would define what came next. An aftermath where fame faded fast and reality rushed back in. As the dazzling lights of America's Got Talent dimmed, and the final notes of Roland Abante's viral performances faded into the background, what remained was a haunting silence, a silence that spoke volumes about how fame, when built on borrowed time, can vanish without warning. Roland returned to the Philippines not with a trophy or a contract, but with memories, applause, and the weight of unmet expectations. Despite being celebrated as the pride of Cebu and praised by global judges, no record labels came knocking, no talent agencies extended offers, and no major endorsements arrived. Instead, he was invited to perform at small-scale Filipino diaspora events, modest community halls, cultural centers, and informal gatherings where the seats were filled not by executives, but by families who simply wanted to hear that fisherman with the golden voice one more time. Roland turned to Facebook and YouTube, performing live from a simple room, often holding a cheap microphone surrounded by bare walls and raw sincerity. These streams became a lifeline, a way to stay connected with his supporters and generate a small but essential income. But the emotional contrast between standing before millions on an international stage and singing to a phone screen in a dimly lit room was brutal. Roland admitted in interviews that the post-AGT period was marked by financial struggles, inner pressure, and an overwhelming fear of being forgotten. The mental toll was immense. He wasn't just battling to survive. He was trying to protect the dignity of a dream that had been shared by a nation. Depression loomed, not because he wasn't talented enough, but because he was reminded that talent alone doesn't guarantee a future in the entertainment industry. The same world that had cried over his audition had moved on, and yet through the despair, Roland continued. Not out of delusion, but out of love. For music, for his family, for the fans who still showed up in the comment sections night after night. He sang not for spotlight anymore, but for survival, for connection, and for a sense of purpose that no judge's scorecard could measure. While others disappeared after elimination, Roland stayed, anchored by his voice, haunted by what could have been, and quietly enduring a reality that most viewers never see: the brutal aftermath of temporary fame. In the midst of the overwhelming silence that followed his brief but brilliant moment on the global stage, Roland Abante found strength not from contracts or crowd sizes, but from the steady, unshakable presence of his family. A wife and son who reminded him daily that worth was not measured in trophies, but in love that endures. His wife, Roland Abante, had long been his silent backbone, holding down the household with quiet resilience every time Roland left for performances, traveled abroad, or locked himself in a room rehearsing for the next live stream. In one social media post, he expressed simple but profound gratitude. Thankful for my wife and son's consistent support, her patience and encouragement. These words may have seemed ordinary to the casual reader, but they encapsulated a world of sacrifice, nights apart, emotional tolls, and a shared commitment to keep pushing forward, even when no one else seemed to be watching. Roland's son, Greg, became more than just a child to him. He became the torchbearer of a dream that had endured poverty, disappointment, and public scrutiny. In several clips posted online, Roland and Greg sang duets, father and son sharing harmonies as if passing down a sacred tradition. At one point, Roland remarked, "It's no longer just about my dream. It's about passing that dream down." That statement redefined his entire journey, not as a failed attempt at stardom, but as a generational legacy built on hope, heartache, and harmony. Through Greg, Roland saw continuity, proof that music wasn't just a means to fame, it was an inheritance of spirit. And beyond the walls of their home, Roland's connection with his fan base deepened. The Roland Abante Worldwide group grew into a digital family of thousands, constantly sharing his videos, supporting his streams, and even organizing fundraising events. These supporters weren't just fans, they were lifelines, holding him up when the mainstream industry turned a blind eye. Roland might not have had a mansion or a music label, but what he had was arguably more powerful. A son who sang beside him, a wife who stood behind him, and a community that believed in him. His legacy was not carved in marble or broadcasted in HD. It was etched into the hearts of those who had witnessed a man refuse to quit, and who understood that real success is not measured in headlines, but in the quiet strength of a father singing not for applause but for love. Despite the heartbreak of elimination and the disillusionment that followed his brief television fame, Roland Abante has refused to vanish quietly into obscurity, instead choosing to reinvent his dream with sheer persistence and the support of those who never stopped believing in his voice. In the months following America's Got Talent, while other contestants faded from memory, Roland remained active, online, in communities, and in the hearts of fans across continents. He continued performing regularly on Facebook and YouTube, turning his modest live streams into virtual concerts where thousands would tune in, not for flashy production, but for the raw emotion and sincerity that only Roland could deliver. These digital stages, though far from the glitz of AGT, became the new pillars of his career, keeping him afloat financially and emotionally. Determined to stay visible, Roland announced plans for a mini tour across the US and Canada in 2025, with scheduled stops in Dallas and Cerritos, focusing on Filipino diaspora communities who had championed him since day one. This wasn't a stadium tour backed by global sponsors. It was a grassroots movement fueled by passion, where fans themselves organized venues, promoted events, and created safe spaces for Roland's music to thrive. At the same time, Roland began working on a new EP, featuring soulful covers inspired by his musical idol Michael Bolton, a style that has defined his voice since the earliest karaoke nights in Cebu. Rumors began swirling in the Philippine music scene about potential collaborations with celebrated vocalists like Brian Magsayo and Marcelito Pomoy, partnerships that, if realized, could spark a resurgence in Roland's professional trajectory. Although nothing official had been confirmed, the mere mention of these names validated that Roland's voice still commanded respect in an industry that had once ignored him. And through it all, one fear lingered in the background, the fear of being forgotten. Roland understood more than most that the glow of television fame fades faster than it arrives. But instead of letting that fear paralyze him, he weaponized it, turning each performance, each live stream, and each humble tour stop into a statement. I'm still here. I still matter. This chapter of his journey is no longer about chasing mainstream validation. It's about reclaiming narrative control, showing that true artistry doesn't need a golden buzzer, just a microphone, a melody, and a heart that refuses to surrender. In the end, Roland Abante's story is not one of a man who won a television show, but of a man who survived it, who walked through the dazzling corridors of fleeting fame and emerged not with a record deal, but with something far more enduring, resilience. While others chase viral moments and crave validation through judges' buzzers or algorithmic applause, Roland has become a symbol of what it means to sing with purpose when the audience forgets your name and the industry turns its back. He never needed million-dollar contracts or reality show trophies to define his worth. His legacy lives in every note sung from a cramped karaoke room, every live stream performed with a shaky mic, and every duet with his son that bridges generations through melody. Roland showed us that you can be eliminated by a show and still win the hearts of thousands. You can be ignored by record labels and still fill rooms with silence after your final note. You can return home without a prize and still be a hero to your family, your town, and your fans across oceans. In a world obsessed with instant success, Roland represents the power of slow, stubborn, soulful persistence. He taught us that not all dreams come wrapped in glitter or delivered through studio contracts. Sometimes they're built quietly, carried on the backs of community, family, and faith. His life is a love letter to the working class, to every forgotten talent who juggles day jobs and heartbreak, to everyone told they weren't enough because they didn't fit the mold. Roland may never have become a global pop icon, but in choosing to keep singing, in bedrooms, in barangays, in live streams and small-town stages, he redefined what it means to make it. He proved that you don't need a big stage to shine. You just need to keep showing up with your truth, your voice, and your heart intact. And in doing so, he didn't just leave behind a song. He left behind a legacy that echoes far beyond the applause. Roland Abante is not just a story of heartbreak. He is the voice that refused to be silenced,